And the photo she was referring to was from when she was in grade 7, a joking flash photo. Somebody clicked on the picture, kept it, wanted her to do more things online, and threatened to expose her and to run that picture on the internet. If she didn't, they made good on that threat, and that's when the police showed up at her door to say this was the case. It goes further than that, but I want to speak with one of the many people who posted online messages in response to Amanda Todd's death. The Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark, put out a video message, and that message was simple: bullying has to stop. Here's an excerpt.
No one deserves to be bullied. No one earns it. No one asks for it. It isn't a rite of passage. Bullying has to stop.
British Columbia Premier Christy Clark joins me live from our studio in Vancouver. Premier Clark, what compelled you to make this video and post it in response to Amanda's death?
Well, Carol, I have been active in trying to combat bullying since back in the days when I was in radio, and I have heard hundreds of stories of people who have been scarred for the rest of their lives from bullying, and I can tell you, they don't get over what happened to them. I am not going to get over hearing what happened to them. We have to do something about this, and you know, the thing is that this is preventable. It doesn't have to happen. Young people don't have to give up, lose their lives. They don't have to commit suicide because they're being bullied, because we know how to stop it. We just have to do more, and we haven't done it yet.
Mm-hmm. Have you talked to, have you been able to put together what happened to Amanda? Have you talked to her family?
I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I know the police are investigating, but here's what I do know. I do know that thousands of children every day in schools across the country are bullied. Some of them relentlessly. Some of them are bullied to their deaths. And it should not happen. You know, we send our kids to schools and we expect them to come home safe. We expect them to be able to learn in a safe environment. And you know, the thing is that we know what to do. We just have to start doing it. One of the things that we all have to do, and every one of us can do this, is we have to teach our children that when we see someone being bullied, when they see someone being bullied, you have to step in. You have to stand up for the little guy. You have to be the one that's going to put yourself between the bully and the bullied. If every child was taught to do that, we wouldn't have bullies in schools anymore.
I want to bring up something that I thought was well put in a National Post editorial from Barbara Kay, in fact. She did an editorial, full comment on this morning. And on that point, she said at least physical bullying can be reported to authorities and the victim can physically escape the tormentor. There is that possibility. But internet bullying, on the other hand, and from what we understand here, this was a real case of internet bullying. Somebody knew her family, where she was. They had that picture of her that she made when she was in grade 7, threatening to expose her, a threat that they made good on. I mean, this was relentless. What do you do to prevent or stop that?
Parents need to befriend their children on Facebook. You need to be able to access your children's email, and you need to be able to monitor what they're doing in as discreet a way as you possibly can so that you can protect them. When you discover that your child is being harmed or bullied, you have to find a trusted authority at the school or that will step in and try and stop it. And you know, I know it's difficult because if you don't trust the people that in whose hands you put your children to do something about it, they might make it worse. But the first step for everyone is to make sure you know what's going on in your child's life. You're monitoring their online life as much as you possibly can, looking for signs of problems so that you can step in, and if necessary, notify the police. That's always an option for people as well.
Yeah. One of the big problems here, though, is that you can't find the bullier on the internet. Sometimes you don't know who they are. And do you think it's time for a law in this country, federally, provincially, I'm not sure where it would land, I know this is in the Supreme Court right now, where you would have access to, through the internet companies, to trace somebody who is engaging in this kind of behavior so that the bully is exposed?
I think we do need to be careful about creating laws that are going to impinge on people's privacy and freedom of speech. I think that's an important principle we need to preserve as well. And I do think that, you know, this situation is awful. I mean, it's tragic. We all look at it and we think, what if that was my child? But at the same time, though, we need to remember that the solution to the problem is going to be education. It's, you know, in British Columbia, we're educating 15,000 educators about how to spot bullying and how to deal with it, how to make sure that bullies get consequences and victims get supported. It's about creating schools where you have where people really value civil discourse. It's about really changing the culture where children go to school so that we're putting our arms around them and protecting them. And we're punishing the bullies in school. You know, sometimes there are cases where it's hard to identify the bully, but in most cases, in my experience, you can identify the bully. And the problem is we don't give teachers and educators the tools to be able to deal with the bully appropriately, and that's what we have to do.
What do you think would be the toolbox for dealing with the bully?
Well, it's a really simple formula. The problem is that we, as parents and educators, look at a conflict and we say, okay, here's the here's one part of the conflict and here's the other. Let's see if we can get along. That isn't what bullying is. Bullying is a perpetrator, a victim. The perpetrator needs to receive consequences that recognize the seriousness of what he or she is doing. The victim needs to be supported and protected.
What's happening now, Premier Clark? I mean, I know you're saying they're trying to make them get along, but what happens? Why can't a teacher, can you give me an example of where a teacher hasn't been able to take on a bully and correct the situation?
Well, you know, sometimes sometimes it's really difficult for the teacher, but before it gets to that stage, we need to give teachers the training so that they can recognize what bullying looks like, first of all, because as you've said, if it's not physical bullying, it's hard to spot it often in the schoolyard. So that's the first thing. Parents need to be vigilant and know that they can go to a school and say, hey, listen, here's what's happening. And then third, they need to understand and have the education, teachers do, to know how to deal with bullying appropriately. Bullies must be punished. They need to have consequences. People need to see that bullying doesn't pay. And victims need to be supported. We need to wrap our arms around these kids as a community and say, this wasn't your fault. You didn't ask for it. And we're going to support you.
What kind of consequences do you think would be appropriate for a bully?
Well, it depends on the bullying. I mean, some bullying is, you know, for some kids, it's a short period of their lives where they're learning. And, you know, we need to make sure that those kids know that that's not appropriate and there are consequences for that. But there are some cases where bullies are repeated, it's repeated, it's prolonged, they take great pleasure out of it, they create gangs around it, gangs of bullies around them. Sometimes they physically harm other children, drive them to suicide, as in this case. I think in those cases, we really need to be thinking about how we're going to make sure that that bully doesn't have any contact with the other children in the school. We need to be really setting an example because ultimately, we have to protect the other kids. We need to make sure that those kids feel safe in their learning environment. And we have to send a message that bullying is not acceptable. So I've said all this is what government can do and schools can do, but ultimately, really, it's parents and communities who need to set the example and say, when bullying happens, because it happens invisibly often, we need to teach our kids that they have a responsibility to step in and take the risk and stand between the bully and the victim and be a leader and protect them. If every kid learned how to do that and had the strength and temerity to do that, bullying would not happen.
What steps, you're the Premier of BC, what steps will you push forward now for changes in your province?
Well, we've already started. I mean, I said, if I ever get a chance, if I ever get back into government, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to do whatever we can to try and combat bullying. So we've just begun. We are beginning to educate 15,000 educators around the province, give them that toolbox. Next month, we'll have the online reporting tool up. and it will be available to parents and to students, and we're going to make sure it's properly resourced so that it's not just a report, that there's something that actually happens out of it. We are going to devote at least one professional development day for every teacher every year to dealing with bullying and ensuring that schools are safe and caring places. So those are just a few of the things that we're doing, and it's part of a very comprehensive program. I'm sure there's more we can do, but this is where we're getting started, and we are starting it now.
I just want to go back to one more thing, and then I'll let you go, because I think it's important. With all of what we hear about bullying online and anonymous bullying online, I hear what you're saying about freedom of speech. Of course, I'm a reporter. I believe in that too, wholeheartedly. But if somebody is making threats, extorting somebody online, harassing them online, why shouldn't that person have the right to go to the internet provider and force them to give, through the police or whatever the situation may be, force them to give up their identity when they're engaging in that kind of behavior?
Well, extortion, physical threats, those are crimes. Those are crimes. I mean, in that case, somebody should, you don't go to your internet provider, you go to the police and ask them to intervene. I mean, that's the tool for that.
The police may have to go to the internet provider and say, well, we want this information. Why shouldn't the internet provider be forced to give that up to police?
Well, you know, I mean, I think that there is a history of cooperation that we've seen, and the police can always have access to the courts as well to get that information. And, you know, I think we need to be careful about the response here and be realistic about what's most important, because the most important thing in bullying is to recognize it and deal with it appropriately in schools, to make it culturally unacceptable. That's the most important thing that we should all, I think, be talking about and thinking about. You know, I'm sure there are other things, particularly at the federal level, that other levels of government can do. But for me, as a Premier of British Columbia, as somebody who really cares passionately about protecting young kids from bullying, it's making sure that our schools are safe places. And we have a big task ahead of us. What happened to Amanda is awful. And you know, for all of us who are watching it who are parents, we cry for her family, and potentially for our own children if it happened to them. But you know, the one good thing that is going to come out of this is her mom has said, share the video. Let kids see what it's like to be victimized. Let them understand and empathize with the victim, because it is a great way to educate people about what can happen and the harm that we can do to each other just through words and through the internet. So her mother's been very brave, I think, to offer that up, and I know that schools will be using it, because something good needs to come out of this.
British Columbia Premier Christy Clark, thank you for speaking with me from Vancouver.